Welcome to our webinar today on You've Eaten the SharePoint Pie, now bite into Office 365. I'm Jeremy Thake. With me today is Chris Johnson, co-founder and CTO of Hyperfish, and Joel Oleson, the Regional Director of Microsoft Services at Konica Minolta. We've got a great session today, packed full of topics around Office 365. And so I'd like to introduce Joel to get started with this webinar.
We've got a packed, very tight webinar for you. Lots of good info today. And I'm going to kick things off today for this webinar. And we're talking about Office 365. We want to talk a lot more about, it's so much more than SharePoint. So let's first, basically we've divided this into kind of three key sections. We're going to talk about the services and kind of the content side of things. We're going to talk about people, and then we're going to really dig into kind of that day in the life of an Office 365 user feature and really feature integration across services and kind of the power of the cloud here. And this first section, I want to talk about kind of where we've come from with productivity. And before I begin, let me just introduce myself. I'm Joel Oleson. I've been working with SharePoint and Office 365 really since the beginning. I was actually hired at Microsoft back in the year 2000 to roll out what would later become SharePoint globally at Microsoft, and later joined the SharePoint team. But what's interesting about all this is it's kind of understanding the evolution of kind of content services, this ECM. There's an organization called AIM that many years ago, I think it's been about 15 plus years ago, they coined the term ECM, or Enterprise Content Management. And what's amazing is how it's actually turned out quite differently than what they thought was going to happen. They originally thought that there was going to be this single repository in an enterprise where everyone would be able to manage their data and tag their data. But really what's happened definitely over the past few years, so much so that they're actually saying the term enterprise content management really is dead, and this next generation of how things are going is more about content services, because it is no longer about a single repository. And let me just kind of key in on the fact that your data, especially the data for teams, is not going to be in that one repository. It's many repositories. In fact, we find out that inside of an organization, it's typical to have 3 to 5 of these enterprise repositories for records and documents. And especially when you're talking about an agile team, every team may have their own strategy for how they work. A development team works very differently than a project management team, or than a product delivery team, or than a vendor management team. And so really there's different tools for different things. So let's move on. And I think basically the history of where we've come from productivity starts way back, way back, even with file shares and file sharing protocols and things like that. But I want to key in on the point where Microsoft really started to take off with Office. And something really clever happened when they combined word processing, presentation, and spreadsheets. And essentially, you brought these technologies all kind of came together in 1990 with something called Office. In 2007, Microsoft did something similar on the server side with SharePoint. And essentially, they brought together the concepts around portals, collaboration, content management, business intelligence, search, all into a single box. Now, while on the server side, that ended up being quite a bit of hardware to get high availability, it really started to be something that could really support the enterprise around all of their collaboration needs inside of a single system. And there was a lot of consolidation that happened with that deployment, but it was actually, it became more and more difficult for small, medium businesses to accomplish the same thing. And then with Office 365, we brought together Exchange, SharePoint, project management, and a bunch more with Office 365. And a lot of people, they kind of think of it as, oh, we moved SharePoint into the cloud, but really it's so much more than that. It's really you've got artificial intelligence and machine learning, a ton of integration between these cloud services, increased mobility, and there's a lot of things that couldn't be done otherwise with things like intrusion detection with cybersecurity. There's a bunch of stuff that Microsoft's done around Azure Rights Management and a lot of sharing and so on. And now when you actually look at that wheel, it's this much more expanded wheel of all these variety of different services, and Microsoft continues to push more and more into this, where it's gone from being kind of this tight wheel of a few services to being kind of this feast of so many services. It's tough for any one group or one organization to kind of get their hands around what actually is happening in this space. So much. Next and I think part of this evolution is understanding what people think they need versus what the technology can support. It's actually amazing how automation and being able to kind of automate things in the enterprise, but also how we should work together, how we can work together. The technology has actually surpassed the way that we actually end up using the technology. It can do so much more. There's so much more we could automate inside of our organizations that we're not. So, and essentially, people ask for things like check-in and check-out, where they should be asking for, we want a multi-user editing environment where we can work together on a document or on a spreadsheet. People say, I need search, but what they really should be asking for is, predictive search. They should be asking for kind of that discovery kind of mechanism. People say, I need a place where I can organize my files and folders, but really what they should be asking for is enrichment on their documents with metadata. It's the business intelligence is something they ask for, but really what they should be asking for is predictive analytics. Why don't you analyze my data and tell me, based on the data, what kind of insights I can gather out of the data. So it's a lot of kind of turning things on their head and kind of looking at this next generation. And even with Office 365, I think a lot of people are stuck on looking at it as a tool rather than looking at it as a system, because there's so much there. How do we start to take advantage of the features that Azure brings together with the power that are in these different solutions that are part of Office 365? So as an example, there's just so many, and you're going to need to click through these, Chris. Basically, there's so many different cloud apps that teams are using these days. It's quite overwhelming when you start looking at what does a team use. Keep clicking. Basically, we've got hundreds of different solutions, and what you're looking at now is kind of all the different solutions that Flow supports. And basically, in an agile team, you find that we're going to use this for our source code, we're going to use this for our change management control, we're going to use this for our blog, we're using this for our analytics. There's so many different cloud apps. A typical company is using between 10 and 16 off-the-shelf cloud apps, which has gone up quite a bit even from last year, and expect even more in organizations over the next year. So I think what I'm trying to say here is the investment in the cloud and the investment in these solutions is just going to continue to increase, but the investment you've made in Office 365 is a good one. Office 365 was -- last year. They're #1 this year for cloud apps for the business. And essentially, the message I want to kind of share with you is, while solutions may come up and down in popularity, Microsoft really is a good investment in the cloud, and it's exciting these days to see what the possibilities are just continuing to increase as these solutions actually get even more and more integrated, and we have things like PowerApps and Flow, which we'll see more of later on in this presentation. So I want to show you kind of an example of this kind of next generation, what's possible. And I want to make myself a presenter to show you kind of a quick example of what I'm talking about. Now here I'm looking at kind of a typical Office 365 SharePoint Online document library. And this document library, I've been storing some pharmaceutical documents. Now you can see a bunch of Word and PowerPoint or PDF documents for different drugs. Now these documents have been uploaded here, and as a user, I have no idea what these documents are. And if I'm adding a document, I'm going to get prompted to add a bunch of metadata. And you can see actually I've added some metadata, so I'm actually going to switch to a different view so you can actually see what it looks like with additional metadata. You can see we've got a concept, we've got drugs and sample terms, and a summary of the content that's been extracted from the document. Now, you can imagine this would be pretty arduous for a user that uploads a document that essentially is getting, it's put all the concepts for the document in here as you add it and so on. So as an example, if I want to add a document here, I've got a few different documents here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag and drop some documents here. And you can see these documents that I've added, I would need to then add in a title and concept and drugs and numbers and medical terms and a summary of the document. Pretty arduous. Microsoft's made it nice and easy where I can, with this little panel here, I can very quickly add the content. But wouldn't it be fantastic if, rather than having to add these, that it automatically was able to extract this content out of the document itself? So imagine, as an example, that these concepts just automatically populate. So essentially what I'm going to tell you is behind the scenes, I've hooked this up to Azure, and there's a third-party component that I'm leveraging called TermSet, that once it detects that these documents have been added, it's going to go ahead and index these documents. It's going to extract the concepts, the drugs, and medical terms, and even use artificial intelligence and machine learning to read the document and populate a summary of these documents. And imagine not even just 3 documents, but hundreds of documents or thousands of documents that I have in my SharePoint environment that I have no idea what these things are. Or they could even be semi-structured documents that they all have some of the same things, and actually train the system to know what the content is in these documents. And I'll tell you right now, it takes about 5 minutes, because that's how often the kind of indexing process works. Once the indexing kicks off, it's going to then populate these simple metadata for these documents. So we'll give this a minute, and while I'm waiting for it, I'm going to just show you the power of what it's like. This is a component that my team built. So we've actually built a solution around called Zendocs. We've built Zendocs Search on top of this library, and this is a solution that our team provides when we're consulting with customers. So we're actually leveraging the metadata, so you can see with that being populated, now we can do a much more powerful search with the metadata that's been extracted out of the documents. We've got managed metadata that matches those things. So when these terms exist in these documents, we can then match it and select the documents. And now we have a very powerful search experience where we then can view or edit the documents and work with them in a much richer way. So we can do kind of multifaceted search, leveraging metadata as part of our documents. Now, if this hasn't completed, I may ask to come back to this in just a second, but we'll check one more time because this is a real-world demo. and hopefully it'll be there. But oh, and yes, it is. So here we have the 3 documents I just uploaded, and here you can see it's auto-populated, extracted content right out of these documents, and it's been able to populate some summary of the content, including drugs that it found in the document, even medical terms that are in these documents. Pretty fantastic stuff. And with that, I will turn it back over to you guys. You want to pick this up, CJ? And if you're talking, we can't hear you.
No, I'm here. Okay.
All right, cool.
Thanks a lot, Joel. So I'm Chris Johnson, and I'm going to talk to you about the power of people in Office 365. So as Joel just pointed out, the world of productivity has evolved as we've moved from on-premises to the cloud. And the same can be said for the way we treat people and information about people as we move from on-premises to Office 365. As part of a migration and moving to the cloud, often we're asking users to make a giant leap of faith in what we're providing them. Most people are creatures of habit. As humans, we like to sort of fall back on what we're used to and where our comfort zone is. And moving to the cloud is no different. And as IT folks, often we take this really for granted. We're used to dealing with new technology all the time. But for many of our users and many of the people in our organizations, it doesn't come quite as second nature as it does to many of us. And so, like I said, we're really making folks, or asking folks, to make a leap of faith, even if we know that the other side of the pond, in this case, or the other bowl, is sort of greener and looks better and is a nicer place to be in the end. But what I'm getting at here is that as we move to Office 365, the solution that we give our users and our people and our organization becomes less and less about the individual tools and products and the things that make it happen behind the scenes, and it puts people at the center of our projects. It means that people become or are more important than ever as we move to the cloud, and how they consume and show up in these services is super, super important. It really becomes the fabric of a cloud deployment. Many times as we move to the cloud, most organizations are thinking about, how do I move my documents and how do I move my files and things like that. But people don't tend, or organizations tend not to put as heavy a weight on the information about their people as importantly as some of those other things. And I'm basically here to say that I believe that people information and information about your people and so forth is equal, or if not more important than content alone. So this is often what people see when they first come to Office 365, and what I really wanted to do here is just illustrate why information about people and why putting people at the center of your cloud migration or Office 365 projects are super important. Often this is a screen they'll see when they open up Office 365 for the first time and go into Delve and start looking around, and it's pretty barren and it's not a very nice welcome. This is often driven from just basic core information lacking about people. And this is no different than it is today. This is nothing new, right? Over 80% of profiles at the moment are missing core information that help drive Office 365 to success, or success in your organization. The reason this is a problem now and hasn't been so much of a problem in the past is that Office 365 is really pivoting on people being central, a central tenant in the service, and that information is showing up in more and more places, such as Delve and contact cards and search and in documents and in co-authoring and in Skype for Business and all of these other places that I'll show you a few examples of at the moment. So if we want Office 365 to be a welcoming place as part of a migration and drive user adoption, then we have to focus really on people and make sure that they show up in the best possible way to make it welcoming, make it productive for them. Here are some examples of the places this stuff shows up and why it's so important. Office 365 is adding new experiences to it every day or every week or every month and every quarter. And this is just an illustration of what we've seen recently in OneDrive and SharePoint, a new people card experience with rich profile photos and more information about the person showing up than they ever did in the past. And you'll see more and more of that rolling out across things like Outlook Web Access, OneDrive and SharePoint experiences, the new Teams experiences, communication sites that are rolling out as of today, and many other places across the Office suite as well as the Office 365 services. Contact cards, something we've all lived with for many, many years, or in fact, over a decade now. In Outlook, it's something we take for granted, but many people see many tens of millions of people per month see blank contact cards, and this is just a productivity killer. If you're trying to get in touch with somebody, trying to find somebody, maybe you're trying to find the office they're in, or maybe you're in a meeting trying to see, hey, who's that guy over the other side of the room there? Being able to have a rich profile experience in contact cards is something that millions and millions and millions of our users see every single day, yet are poorly neglected. SharePoint and Office 365 are making huge investments in bringing your corporate intranet to your pocket through mobile experiences, whether that be native applications or the new mobile web-friendly SharePoint site experiences. Often these include rich profile data about your people. And if I'm a user and I show up and see a bunch of silhouetted, sort of faceless folks in my team or in my group or in my organization, it really doesn't drive that deep level of connection with other users that you want in your organization. Skype is a very common and popular, Skype for Business in particular, a very common and popular product in Office 365 that is really pivotal or pivots on having rich contact information about people, whether that be profile photos or even things like just basic stuff like their mobile phone number or their work phone number being populated and being able to call them. It's pivotal on data about and information about people. A very common one, once you get past the sort of the surface of people information showing up in Office 365 and some of those new experiences that I mentioned, one of the things we see many organizations come to is building process automation for their organization in Office 365. And that could be around automating some paper-based, form-based process, could be document construction automation, or it could be some other process in your organization. But many times these business process automation projects require information about people to be successful. That could be for things like task escalation, if somebody doesn't respond in time, or perhaps if they're away or out of the office, being able to escalate these tasks. These pieces of people information or information about the users in the organization are critical to driving business process automation projects in a timely manner for things like task escalation, for example, or also things like perhaps sign-off limits for POs or what have you, purchase orders. And often business process automation projects stall because they can't build the automation that they need because they're lacking key pieces of information about people. People search, obviously, one of the most common things on everybody's intranet is being able to find somebody, whether that be in a staff directory or just through things like SharePoint search, being able to type somebody's name in or their division or maybe a customer name of who they work with and be able to pull rich and meaningful results back. This all pivots on having great data about people, and it's just another facet for of how people information surfaces in Office 365 and why it's so pivotal. Finally, experiences like groups and also teams more recently. These are all people-centric new experiences that Office 365 have added recently that pivot around this concept of people. And when we have our users move to Office 365, to drive productivity and get the most out of it, we've got to ensure that these experiences light up in the best way possible with rich and complete information. Some of the more sophisticated IT-focused functionality that is available in Office 365 are things like dynamic distribution lists. These are the ability to create email groups and DLs, as they're called, in Office 365, where people don't need to manage the membership. They don't need to add individuals or remove individuals. You can go create a dynamic distribution list that's based, the membership of which is based on things like who has sales in their team, department name, for example. And so we can build dynamic distribution lists that way. People get membership that way and are automatically put on these distribution lists. These were things that were quite hard or arduous in the past, or just managed manually, that are possible in Office 365 today. And again, pivot around having great information and accurate information about people in your organization. So why is this important? Sure, you could go roll out Office 365 and invite everybody to it and say, hey, it's okay, we don't have a great Delve experience, or people search is broken, or people can't find each other with contact cards, or their profiles are incomplete or out of date. But why is that important? Well, the first thing is, going back to that comment I mentioned about user adoption, ensuring that people come back to the tools that you deploy in an organization is, a key requirement of that is that they have a great experience doing so. If they don't find value in the tools, they'll obviously try it once and not come back. And so you've made a big investment in, or are making a big investment in Office 365 and the likes. So you want the best ROI on that, and being able to drive that user experience and drive users' ROI is a key tenet of ensuring your success there. The second one is around broken functionality. So obviously being able to use the tools that you've just bought is critical to your ROI. And many of those tools pivot around having complete and accurate information about people, whether it be something from a business process automation project with the likes of Flow or Nintex for Office 365, or it could be something as simple as Delve and ensuring that people can find people in an organization and have a good experience doing so. And then finally, the increased workload on IT can be significant without getting the stuff right. That could be anything from increased help desk calls for simple things that could be automated, like I want to update my phone number, or my office location is out of date. Or it could be things like having to build complex and custom solutions for things like staff directories because your data in your organization is just not in your Active Directory or in SharePoint profiles is just not complete and accurate. So the plethora of workload on IT increases can be significant if you don't think about this stuff. There's critical projects in an organization that can fail. I'll quickly go through a couple of these. Personalized intranets. We've heard customers rolling out Office 365 wanting to do personalized intranets for things like showing role-specific information to tailor things like news and alerts on the homepage of the experience that people get, to drive a really nice, rich first-run experience for users when they come to your Office 365 environment, but not being able to key off roles or information in people's profiles because it's maybe inaccurate can be a critical blocker. I mentioned business process automation, I mentioned the corporate directory and so forth, but in general, often we find that during cloud migration projects, people don't want to move bad data from one place to the other. You think about this often for documents about which content you're going to move from on-premises to the cloud, but it's also critical to think about your people and profile information as you move from on-premises to the cloud as well, to make sure that you light up and benefit from all of the new capabilities in the cloud. So planning for success. How do you? I've spelled doom and gloom, but how do you do well in this? Well, my first takeaway here is for planning for success is making people as critical as your content. When you're thinking about Office 365, think about people information as critical as or equal pegging as your content migration strategy as well. Planning your synchronization strategy is key. If you do a lift and shift from on-premises to the cloud, you'll end up with a lot of inaccurate data that is synchronized from maybe on-premises Active Directory or on-premises SharePoint profiles, maybe out of date or incomplete and inaccurate. And so completing a plan for your synchronization strategy is really critical. That can be things like which attributes you're going to move, which ones have got good data, bad data, and so forth, and also right down to which users are you going to move. Many organizations have lots of old defunct accounts that they don't want to move into the cloud, and you could be paying licensing for those if you're not careful in Office 365. And then finally, spring cleaning your profile information. Migration in Office 365 migration is a great time to think about sprucing up and spring cleaning your profile information to ensure that when users land in Office 365 for the first time, whether that be an Outlook web access or maybe your intranet homepage or perhaps Delve, that they get a rich, complete, and really great looking experience to help drive their ROI and adoption. The too hard, let's do it later line we hear so often is kicking the can down the road, and you only get one shot at keeping a user for life the first time. And so it's super important to not kick this can down the road and consider it a priority as part of your migration plan. I believe this stuff so much, I built a business around it. Hyperfish is where I work, day in, day out, and our goal in life is to make people and information and profiles consistent and of high quality by driving a great user experience, making sure that we light up new features in Office 365, and making sure that IT can deliver critical IT projects with low overhead and reduced workload. If you're interested in learning more about us, hyperfish.com is a place to find out about what we provide in this space. If you get this stuff right, there are some outcomes that you'll benefit from. Improved accuracy and quality of people information is absolutely critical to things like employee productivity and satisfaction. Being able to find one another in an organization is key to driving productivity, and you can certainly improve that by ensuring you've got accurate and quality information about your people. And then also, more importantly, with regards to migration projects specifically, or adoption of Office 365, is take advantage of the tools you've invested in. You've bought Office 365 for a reason. You can take advantage of what it offers. Many folks have to turn certain features off, like Delve and things, because it just doesn't show up well without focusing on information about people. And so I would urge you all to consider ensuring that you place people at the front of your Office 365 strategy, along with content and the services that you use, to ensure you could drive increased adoption and ROI on that. With that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Jeremy Thake, who's going to run us through a demo of what this is like when it all comes together and how great Office 365 can be. Jeremy.
Great, thanks CJ. Hopefully you got a lot out of what John and CJ was saying, but I think sometimes it really is in the devil is in the detail. We're going to show a demo of what this stuff looks like. So I'm just going to jump over to my environment here, and what we're going to do is highlight the fact that Office 365 really expands how much services you've got available to you inside of Office 365, especially if you've moved from this world of kind of working with SharePoint and thinking about documents and lists and libraries. You'll see on the left-hand side there in our app launcher, there's a significant amount of services available. And what we're going to do to start with is just to jump into SharePoint and into the SharePoint homepage, which if you're on premises, you might not be that familiar with. And so with that, what I can do is I can go through and create a brand new site. Now the first thing you'll notice is this URL, if I just hit my tenant name.sharepoint.com, it lands me on a different page which isn't as convenient for me. And unfortunately, learning this URL, I guess we're familiar with that in SharePoint, but it's not really that end user friendly. And so that's why I demoed launching that via the app launcher itself. So I'm going to create a new site here called Webinar in June. I'm going to make that so that it's private to only people I'm going to send invites to. And you'll see here that it's immediately already going through and creating that site, even though I've not quite finished with the members. But I can come through here and just click finish. What that will do is it will jump me through to this new modern SharePoint experience. The reason it's modern is that it'll work very nicely on browsers and look a lot more flowing than what we're used to in the traditional SharePoint experience you see in the UI. Now in the top right here, you'll see I have the ability to manage my membership. And in this case, what I want to do is I'm going to add some external users. So I'm going to immediately come through here and type in CJ's name. And what you'll see is that SharePoint's actually going to struggle a little bit with adding guests from this view, because it'll only resolve people that are inside of the environment. So I'm going to basically, for now, go up to this group conversation, which takes you from the SharePoint site up into the Outlook experience, but this is where you manage group membership. Now, unfortunately, what you'll see straight away is that although the SharePoint site's been created, the group space hasn't been created as quickly as SharePoint. So this is something you kind of have to get used to, is being a little bit patient in this world in Office 365 where you've moved from one service, as in SharePoint, to multiple services. But you'll see there that automatic refresh, I didn't touch anything on the keyboard there, and now I'm inside of this group. Now, the nice thing about coming into this view is that it shows me straight away that although I created a SharePoint site called Webinar-June, which is a private group, if I went up to my members up the top here and started adding some members here, again, the interface looks similar to where you add members in SharePoint, but the benefit here is that I can actually start adding guests. So I've got CJ in here, and I'm just going to add Joel here too as a guest. And for demo purposes, I will also add myself. And when I click save, that will go and add those members directly into the group. And you'll see then now, if I clicked on guests, that it will filter and show that these are all the guests in the system, and that me, Jeremy Thake, as the administrator of this environment, is also the owner and a member of the group. So membership's pretty straightforward, but there's definitely that caveat from a security perspective. I like this view because I can start to see that if I start communicating with people, welcome to the group. When I send this, it doesn't just make this available to me inside of this group view. It'll actually automatically send an email to CJ and Joel and my Hyperfish account because I'm a member of that group. And so it allows me to collaborate with people not just inside of my team, but also externally that have access to emails in that way. But for instance, if I had this scenario where I wanted to share the slide deck, which is what we actually did when we were building out this webinar, is that when I upload this slide deck, people will get access to this group and they'll be able to start sharing and contacting. So you can see here that CJ has actually replied to that email directly with very little kind of obstruction to integrate into this group. Now as that file uploads, CJ will get notifications of those things as well. While it's doing that, one thing that has just come out is that now there's this thing called Stream. Now what Stream allows me to do is upload videos, and this is a replacement for Office 365 videos. And I can go through here and upload a file or drag and drop it on. So I'm just going to go to my desktop here and just drag and drop this recording of a video that I recorded, we actually did this. We recorded some stuff just to show the demo flows rather than doing it live because we're all traveling. And you can see here there's this little tip that says what groups I'm in. So I can start to type in here, and what you'll see is that I can select the webinar groups, and you'll notice that the June one hasn't quite propagated on this list yet. Again, you have to be a little bit patient there. What that means is that If I upload this video and add it for this group, when anyone comes to stream and browses, they will get permissions automatically if they're a member of this group to all those videos that are uploaded via stream. Now, in addition to this, what it allows me to do, if I go and have a look at what content I've already shared, and you can see that one's already going through and processing, is that I can grab this particular video, and I'm going to make sure this is paused, and I can go through into my new site, and I can edit this page. And again, SharePoint's come a long way in terms of how you can do editing now. And I'm going to hover over this plus, and in my toolbox, we now have support for lots of other services within of Office 365 related around this group. So I can go into Stream here and paste in my video, and that's actually going to embed the video directly into my page. And now I can actually go through and publish that page there, so that when people land on my SharePoint group, not only do they get to see all of my conversations and the activity on my files, but we can also come in and see videos that I've uploaded too. And for instance, on the left-hand side, when I go into my OneNote notebook for this group, that's going to open up the notebook related to this group, and I can start adding a new section, demo script, and I can say this is the script, and I can say section 1 would be create site, 2 would be to add members, and we can go through, and then that way CJ and Joel can actually come in and collaborate on this OneNote at the same time, either directly in the browser, but also in the rich client or on the mobile client where they can get access to these things. What you'll find is if you already have OneNote on your machine, you'll instantly be able to see the OneNotes that you've opened from the groups will show up on your mobile, so you can quickly open those up. And I can see CJ commenting on the fact that I sound a little bit odd. Thank you, CJ. Now, if I jump back to the group quickly, not only do we get files that I can kind of jump into here, but I can also see a shared calendar. So my Exchange service, for instance, allows me to, I can schedule meetings as part of the group, and everyone who's a member of the group will get these invites. And so as you maybe come and join from groups, this is your shared environment, and you can do calendar overlays of the groups you're available to see calendar invites relevant to the groups that you're in. And then additionally, if I come over here, one of the other neat things that we can do is we can leverage a service called Planner. Now with Planner, this is essentially, if you're familiar with Trello externally, we have the ability to create buckets. So I could have a complete bucket, a to-do bucket, and I could say that CJ needs to polish his accent, and I can actually assign that to CJ because he's a member of that group. So if I do that here, and we can actually change that to he's practicing his accent. And when I click close there, when CJ would see that, that would be assigned to him when he comes into that Planner environment. And so this allows us, not just as an internal team and group, but also with people you collaborate with externally, like when we're working with Joel in this webinar, to have these tasks, manage our files, be able to have a shared notebook and share recordings of videos, all from one security construct of membership. Now over time, there will be more and more of these services that get bolted into this experience of groups. And you've seen that maybe you were familiar with things like calendar and tasks before, but having it in a centralized place now through Office 365 is an extremely compelling way of doing this inside of the system. Now Matt Wade actually has a great slide called the periodic table of Office 365, which starts to explain how you can navigate all these services inside of Office 365. So for instance, you can see here that we have this notion of mail, calendar, people, and tasks within Outlook. But as I just showed you, you can also do Planner as well, but from a project management, from a team-oriented view, as well as this notion of to-do in sort of a personal view as well, which is the replacement for Wunderlist. As an organization, much like Joel and CJ have both highlighted, there's some key takeaways that you'll want to go from here in terms of the fact that there are so many services that you can consume within Office 365. And as you saw with the SharePoint sites, membership isn't quite there yet from an Office 365 group's perspective. I didn't mention Microsoft Teams, but with Microsoft Teams, just quickly, when you come in, it won't automatically create your webinar-June group. But if you click Add Team down the bottom here and Create Team, you'll see this option here that says, do you want to create a team for an existing group? And if I click on that here, it'll allow me to take the existing group I've got and create a team around that June group. Now, one of the caveats here for right now, which they did say would be available in June, is that CJ and Joel wouldn't be able to contribute in Microsoft Teams because it doesn't support external users yet, but it's something they're actively working on. The same with Stream. If Joel or CJ went and viewed my Stream video I just uploaded, that wouldn't work for them just yet because external groups. So what I'm highlighting is that bear with this scenario. These services are all bolting together, but there is some time to go to get all these things to completely work across the scenarios you may have, especially if you're trying to integrate with external users within these groups that you create. And so with that, Joel, did you want to just talk about your key takeaways here, what you would say as an end message based on what you talked about today in the webinar?
Yeah, I wanted to definitely make sure that people understood. I probably didn't properly introduce myself. I'm a regional director inside of Konica Minolta, and my team does SharePoint development and deployment around Office 365. We're a partner of Hyperfish, and it's exciting to join these guys. But if anybody liked what they saw here, we definitely want to help follow up with them and facilitate any kind of deployment or any work that people might be looking for across the content services stuff that I showed with term set and kind of auto extraction and AI and machine learning, but also in any kind of migration and work moving into Office 365. So I'm excited to join these guys, but as well, I know there's many customers here on the line that are in various stages of their adoption of Office 365, and I know it can be quite overwhelming. So our team does training and can help people with their adoption strategies, and definitely around this helping people take advantage of a lot of the stuff that Hyperfish brings to the table for enriching the people experience as well as the content experience.
All right, thanks, Joel. It's Chris here again. I guess my key takeaway from, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this today, is that that they say content is king, and one of the facets of content is people and information about your people. And the reason I say that is because it's so critical in driving the ROI and success of Office 365 by lighting up new features, ensuring that users have a great experience, and also driving IT's ROI from Office 365 with reduced workloads, whether that be from the help desk or building custom solutions.
Yeah, and I guess from my perspective, the big thing I say based on a demonstration is that there are a lot of services in Office 365, and the best way I've seen it be successful in customers is to start small, both from the services that you use, but also with the teams you introduce it with. I've found that having success in smaller groups of teams with projects that are key to or critical to the organization, that maybe start by using SharePoint and maybe communications in email on the Outlook group side of the house. And then as you kind of progress, maybe introduce things like Stream for video recordings and task management planning. What you'll find is that those teams will get visibility in other parts of the organization that will see how effectively they're working as a team and start to bring those things on themselves. And so it can be overbearing to try and communicate this to the whole org. And so starting small with both the services and the teams definitely seems to be working as an organic way of showing the success of Office 365.
Yeah, and let me just jump back in and say, I think the key takeaway that I would also kind of point people at is don't get overwhelmed, start small, and as these guys have both suggested, but don't think of it as a tool. If you kind of put those walls up that this is a tool and the features are what they say they are, you're not looking at the power of the cloud. You're not understanding how much bigger this could be with how these things actually work together. And it's actually the greater whole that brings many of these solutions together. And it really is an evolution. It's like somebody say, well, when is the SharePoint deployment ever done? With Office 365, especially, it's an evolving thing. It's always getting better, and Microsoft is definitely listening. So make sure you log your feature requests and the user voice with Microsoft as well. And we've got some time for Q&A. Let's open this up. Just go ahead and use the question and answer part of the GoToWebinar. And I know that some people have been asking about the recording, and definitely we are going to provide a link to recording in a follow-up email. And the first question we have is there a way for us on-prem folks to see what from the periodic table will not ever come to on-prem? And I think that's a good question, and I think Matt Wade, we'll have to, I think I don't know if he's on this particular one. I saw he was tweeting about the webinar, so I'm not sure if he's on here. But
I think the way to answer that from both myself and CJ and Joel have all coming from Microsoft is reading the tea leaves of on-premises versus online. If it's a brand new service that has appeared in Office 365 and wasn't something that got moved from on-prem as a server product to the cloud, it's unlikely that they're going to build a server version of the product, just with the way that Microsoft have got their vision to move everyone to the cloud. So what that means is that Skype for Business, which was Link Server, rebranded, SharePoint Server and Exchange Server will continue to be available to on-premises customers. But for things like Microsoft Teams and PowerApps and Planner and Stream, I really wouldn't expect those things to come down to on-premises customers.
I think the exception, maybe you're going to talk about this, but the exception to that is the gateway and hybrid type scenarios. And I'll let you continue on. Sorry.
Yeah, and so the exception there is where there are innovations in SharePoint Online, some of those innovations will be pushed down into SharePoint Server as feature packs. And so at the SharePoint event, the virtual summit that happened in May, they talked about a feature pack 2 and what was going to be loaded in that. But what I would assume there is that, unless you guys are already running SharePoint Server 2016 and you're ready to deploy a feature pack, you're not going to be able to take advantage of those new features anyway. So from a preparedness perspective, if you are staying on premises, you really need to make sure you're on the latest and greatest of SharePoint, Skype for Business, and Exchange Server products to take advantage of these feature packs when they release. But already, for instance, they haven't been clear on whether the communication sites that have been launched in SharePoint and they're rolling out as of today will make it down into SharePoint Server or not. And so this is where you might have to have your hand forced to start considering a hybrid configuration where if you want things like Planner and Stream, that those things are enabled and lit up in Office 365, but you keep things like SharePoint Server and Exchange Server available for whatever business reasons you have for keeping that data in your own data centers.
You could even say something as simple as modern lists and libraries. How long have people been waiting for the modern list to arrive in a feature pack? And I don't think we even heard commitment that it would make it even in a feature pack 2.
Yeah, I think the only thing they've stated so far for feature pack 2 is the SharePoint framework. And even then, it will be the SharePoint framework that was originally shipped. It won't support the multi-column layouts and a bunch of other things just yet. So there's always going to be a delay. And I think there are some things that were just built with a cloud in mind and weren't built as a server product, and we will never see them in the server version of the product.
Yeah.
I think it's worth pointing out that, sorry, it's Chris here. I think it's worth pointing out as well that, as much as we would love to have all of the Office 365 stuff come to on-premises, it's not really in Microsoft's best interests. And the reason for that is it's just tough. It's tough to deliver on-prem software. The future is for evergreen style services, and Microsoft understand that. And so it's I think it's where they're going to draw the line in the sand is yet to be determined, but I think the line that we're seeing being drawn, or at least maybe the outline of the line that's going to be drawn, is very cloud friendly, and that Microsoft will continue to do just enough for on-prem, but probably no more than that is my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I think and as I mentioned, the exception of if you're doing Flow and PowerApps, it's like the functionality may extend in kind of hybrid ways in. So like those who are looking to take advantage of Flow, where Flow really is designed around integrating a lot of these content services repositories with SharePoint, they're investing a lot in these kind of hybrid configurations, and I think it's nice to be able to see that stuff came fairly quickly, but a lot of it you really have to approach it from the perspective of Microsoft's going at it from this mobile first, cloud first kind of approach.
Yeah. Okay, are there any other questions? Feel free to type away or raise your hand. Not at this point. Everybody's shy.
Why don't you talk about how people can get Hyperfish from a on-prem or a cloud perspective? I think that's kind of a common question. I would understand.
Yeah, sure. It kind of runs on from the last question actually, because it is a common question we get around a hybrid on-prem and the cloud, and so I'll give you a quick sort of lowdown on that. So what Hyperfish does is it basically interrogates all of your information about people and profiles based on a set of rules that the organization provides. So it might say, hey, I need my profile photos to be up to date so that they light up Office 365 well, or light up SharePoint on-prem well, or things like that. So we go in and do that interrogation of the profile data, and then we go and work with users to go and complete that profile data if it's not complete, accurate, or up to date. We work against on-premises or hybrid or online. So if you're just a cloud customer, we can certainly ensure that your people profile data is up to date. If you're an on-premises customer, where we make sure that that data gets written back to your on-premises SharePoint profiles or Active Directory data sources, or other data sources for that matter, to make sure that when somebody updates their profile information, that once we've gone in and ascertained that it's incomplete or wrong, and somebody's gone and completed it, we can write it back to the right place. And that's really important in hybrid deployments, that you write it back to the correct place. If you just write your profile photo, for example, into your SharePoint Online profile, it'll only show up in probably one of the 5 different places it could show up across Active Directory on premises, Active Directory in the cloud, Exchange Online, SharePoint on premises, Outlook, contact cards, Skype for Business, all those sorts of things. So it's really critical that you write it back to the system of record, which in hybrid deployments is on premises, obviously. So we ensure that can happen. If you're interested in learning how complete and accurate your profile information is today, we actually have a free analysis tool that you can go and see on hyperfish.com, which is really straightforward to run, and it will go and analyze your people profile information and show you a snapshot of what shape you're in, and see how sort of up to date and complete it is, and it can be pretty eye-opening. It's a nice health check as part of a 365 project to go and see sort of what state you're currently in, and then obviously we have a full product which is paid for, which will go and make sure that that's all complete and up to date and accurate based on the rules you want to enforce. So, for example, that might be, if you're rolling out Skype for Business, it might mean ensuring everybody's got phone numbers, or if you're rolling out Delve, it might be skills and expertise and profile photos and all of those kinds of things. So you can configure and ensure that we're enforcing the correct set of rules. If you want to keep up to date with what we're up to and developments in our product, go to hyperfish.com. As you can see on the screen, there's a little keep up to date or keep up with Hyperfish box at the bottom there where you can enter your email address and sign up. Jeremy does regular podcasts, not just about our products, but about what's going on in the Office 365 landscape. And of course, Joel is prolific on the internet with blogs and across social media with sort of his insights of how he sees the world of Office 365 as well. So we had our contact information up on the previous slide. Feel free to get in touch. We'd love to hear from people. And if you have any feedback for us or other questions, we'd be happy to answer them. Any parting thoughts, Jeremy and Joel?
Thank you. Thanks for joining, everyone. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks again, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.